Most runners think they're running easy, but they're actually training too hard. If you're constantly tired or hitting plateaus, your zone 2 training might be way off. So I'm Dr. Peralta. I'm a physical therapist and run coach. For nearly 10 years, I've helped hundreds of runners stay injury free and smash their PRs. And smart heart rate training is a big part of how we do it. In this video, I'm going to show you the 3 most accurate ways to calculate zone 2 so you're not just spinning your wheels, burning out, or training in the wrong zone. I'm going to break down the most common method that beginner runners use, a more accurate method, and then the gold standard method. Plus, I'll share some stories from my own experience to help you apply the right method based on your goals. So why zone 2 matters, right? It improves your aerobic endurance, right? So if you're trying to do running, running's an aerobic sport, doing a lot of zone 2 training is going to improve your aerobic capacity, right? It's going to improve your heart and lungs. If you're beginning, it's going to help you get to your VO2 max. And it's going to reduce injury risk when you do zone 2, the easy running, because a lot of times many beginners, they train in the gray zone, zone 3, where they think they're doing easy, but then they're actually in zone 3 and they're doing too hard. And that's putting too much stress on their body, leading to overuse injuries. So zone 2 is very important. So generally it's 60 to 70% of your heart rate max, but how you calculate that matters more than you think. So method 1, the heart rate max, the age predicted formula, is the most common formula, right? Zone 2, again, 60 to 70% of heart rate max. So traditionally it's 220 minus your age, right? So if you're, let's say 35 years old, right? So let's do a quick math, 220 minus, all right, so 220 minus 35 would be 185 beats per minute. But a more accurate formula, there's a Carvonian heart rate max prediction formula, is 206.9 minus parentheses 0.67 times your age. So let me just show you on the screen. Yeah, so you can take a look on the screen here, see what I'm talking about. You can see the formula there, right? So that's some people say that 206.9, and this is for men. And then for women, they have a different breakdown here. Let me just pull that up real quick. Let's see. Yes, and for women, it's 206 minus parentheses 0.88 times your age, which would be the max heart rate for women. Cool. So this formula is a bit more accurate than 220 minus your age, but they roughly give you the same numbers, roughly. All right. So for the 35-year-old runner who's a male, at using that more accurate formula per se, it'd be 183 beats per minute would be a heart rate max. And then zone 2 would be, again, 60 to 70% of that. So it'd be 110 to 128 beats per minute. When I first learned about heart rate training, this was a method that I used. You say, hey, a lot of beginners should just use this, very easy. I'm talking about just 220 minus your age, just plug and play and just go run with it. And many Garmin watches are just use this by default. It's just a good start for beginners, better than nothing. But there's another method which I actually recommend, is the heart rate reserve method, more accurate, also a Carvonian method. So for zone 2 here would be heart rate max minus heart rate rest, your resting heart rate, times 0.6 or 60% to 70%, and then plus heart rate rest. So to do this, you first have to get your heart rate rest, your resting heart rate. How do you do that? You can measure it by hand, use a device, and you should do it first thing in the morning, right? Before you have your coffee, right? You just wake up, you're in a resting position, right? Because if you start moving around, your heart rate's going to start moving up again. So to get a true heart rate mass, it should be like within the first 5 minutes of waking up, again, using a device, taking the pulse by hand, you get the radial artery, the carotid artery, multiply, etc. Anyways, you get your resting heart rate, and then you should also have your heart rate max. You could use the formula from prior, or we'll talk about some tests. You could actually get your heart rate max with certain testing, but let's say use the formula. So you just predicted your heart rate max from a formula. Then you got your actual heart rate, resting heart rate. So then your zone 2, I'm going to use someone who has a resting heart rate, let's say 55, and then would take a heart rate max for that 35-year-old male again. So it would be like 183 heart rate max minus resting heart rate 55 would be 128 times 60% to 70%, right? And then you add the resting heart rate again. So in this formula, it would be 132 to 145 beats per minute, right? So I'll just show you here on my phone again what that formula looks like. Bam. So you can see how the numbers kind of vary when compared to the method 1, the heart rate max, age predicted formula. So it's actually a little higher, right? And I actually think the method 2, the heart rate reserve formula, is a bit more accurate, because sometimes you're like, whoa, this is way too low. Maybe you're actually in zone 1 when you're doing the method 1 formula, and your true zone 2 might be actually closer to this heart rate reserve formula. I actually just learned recently that Apple Watch uses this method, and it takes into account your resting heart rate. So if you're fit and have a low resting heart rate, this method adjusts for that. And it's my go-to recommendation for more like intermediate runners who want more precision, more guidance. Like, okay, I want a more accurate representation as my fit, especially as your fitness improves. Right in the very beginning, maybe your resting heart rate is a bit higher, and it's maybe actually more accurate, more closely related to the method one, the age predicted heart rate max. But as you get fitter, you want to take into account your resting heart rate. And then so again, good for the intermediate runner. So now, but there's one more method if you're more competitive, you're more elite. It's the lactate threshold heart rate. It's actually, I think, is the most accurate and most competitive runners use this method. You could, to get the most accuracy, go to a lab, get lab tested. You go exercise physiologist lab or cardiologist, depends in your setting or where you're located. It will sample your blood lactate either from a finger prick. They actually prick your finger to get your blood sample to get your blood lactate as you're running on a treadmill, right? You're running on a treadmill, it's ramping up and it gets your blood lactate. Or you do, they'll prick your ear as well, and there's no variation. And then usually a test takes about 10 to 20 minutes or so. You'll get your blood lactate, your lactate threshold. And the good thing about this test, whether they're doing it submaximal or maximal, if they're doing it maximal, what that means they take it to complete exhaustion. You also get your heart rate max and your VO2 max if they got the oxygen apparatus. So sometimes they combine two, VO2 max plus lactate threshold testing. You could do both in one stone and get your max VO2, your heart rate max, and your blood lactate. So it's a great test to do. And some people just do the lactate threshold test, which is fine too. All right. And then when you do that, then you estimate your zone 2 is usually 85 to 89% of your lactate threshold heart rate. Because your lactate threshold is not your max heart rate. It's a little lower than that. So it's your lactate threshold heart rate, and you do 85 to 89% of your lactate threshold heart rate. Now, if you got your max heart rate because you did that more expensive test, great. And you use your heart rate max. So this is what elite runners use, this lactate threshold. Now, if you don't have access to a lab, you can also do a field test, a 30-minute time trial, right? You go all out for 30 minutes, and you average the last 20 minutes to get an estimate of your lactate threshold heart rate. It's actually fairly accurate when I've seen this compared to the lab testing data. So you could just do an all-out 30-minute time trial, get the last 20 minutes, and that would be your lactate threshold heart rate, and then multiply that formula again, 85 to 89%. Will give you your range for your zone 2 using your lactate threshold heart rate. So which method should you use, right? If you're a complete beginner, you're casual, you don't really care too much, just use 220 minus your age or the other formula I talked about. It's not the most accurate, but if you're a complete beginner, it's good enough, right? It will just get the job done. If you have a Garmin, it's already like pre-packaged in there. Heart rate reserve, right? So you have an Apple Watch. The Apple Watch will actually calculate your resting heart rate, especially if you wear it all day. You wear it, you first thing in the morning, you're wearing the Apple Watch. It will get your heart rate, your resting heart rate. And then as you exercise, it starts learning your data. So you could do that. And it's a bit more accurate, or you could obviously plug the numbers in yourself, plug and play yourself. And you could also reprogram in a Garmin watch to do the heart rate reserve method. So again, if you use a wearable watch, etc., heart rate monitor is a great method to use, especially an intermediate runner trying to get more accurate with zone 2. But then if you're more elite, more competitive, like you want to really get the most accurate data, do the lactate threshold heart rate method, right? Again, go out for that time trial or, work with an exercise physiologist and do a lactate threshold VO2 max test, get all the data you need, VO2 max, heart rate max, and the lactate threshold. And it's going to also help you when you're doing other zones too, right? If you're doing tempo runs, you want to do a threshold pace, you're going to get your threshold data from your threshold, your lactate threshold testing that you just did. And then with these methods, right, you want to reassess your resting heart rate every month, every 2 months or so. You want to reassess your lactate threshold every month, every 2 months, etc. Because as you get fitter, your numbers may change, right? You don't want to stagnate and just rely on old data. You want to keep re-updating your data. I recommend at the very least every 3 months, keep looking. But some people need to do it every 2 months, every 1 month, etc. So start with what you have access to. If you're a beginner, heart rate max is okay. If you use an Apple Watch or Garmin, it's likely that you already have these formulas calculated. Again, you could go into the settings of these devices and just double check, okay, does it actually match a true resting heart rate, etc. And if you're really serious about racing, go with lactate threshold heart rate. So if you want to run, pain-free, avoid injury, and train smart, I also have a free training video for, how to run pain-free and hit PRs. A link in the description. Learn how to build a plan that combines smart running training principles the right way.